Okay, let's unpack this one. Today, we are diving deep into a pedal that's, well, arguably the perfect distillation of that big arena rock tone. The MXR M78 Custom Badass 78 Distortion.
Ah, yes, the 78. Great
This
choice.
little metallic red box. It came out in 2011 and it took on this like legendary mission, right? To capture the huge cranked, hot rodded amp sounds from the late 70s hard rock scene and early 80s metal.
Exactly. We're talking massive, saturated British tube stacks in a pedal.
Yeah. So our mission today is to figure out the exact engineering and maybe the secret history MXR tapped into to make this compact thing sound so, well, enormous.
It's a fantastic starting point, really, for any player obsessed with those high-gain vintage tones. And like you said, the M78, it was the anchor. It launched that whole sub-brand.
The first custom badass pedal.
The very first, yeah. And it was designed specifically to blend that coveted vintage tone, the real essence of 1978 guitar sounds, with the precision and, I guess, the reliability that modern analog circuits offer. It was a big statement.
Like MXR saying, we're back in the high-gain game.
Pretty much. A focus on classic build ideas, but, reliable.
And the sonic target, it couldn't be clearer. When we say 1978, we're talking that sweet spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the Marshall Super Lead, the Plexi,
Yep, the Plexi head,
was being pushed to its absolute limit, often modded for extra gain, and just before the early JCM 800s really took over.
That's the sound.
It defined heavy riffs for, generations.
That's right. And, that era demanded power and punch because guitarists were finally trying to fill stadiums.
Yeah.
They needed definition, not just sheer volume.
Right, clarity within the game.
Which is vital for understanding the M78. It is a true distortion pedal. That's key.
Okay, so not just pushing the amp harder like an overdrive.
Exactly. It's not just driving an existing clean tone harder. It's generating its own complex clipping and harmonics. It's really designed to mimic the sag and the response of power tubes running flat out. It has to sound and feel amp-like.
So, okay, how do they capture the physics of huge tube transformers and vacuum tubes with just, a few transistors and op-amp?
Well, that brings us right into the guts of the M78.
Yeah, what's the core architecture and how does it connect back to MXR's own history?
Well, what's interesting here is that MXR went with let's say, a familiar foundation. It's built on an analog op-amp-based distortion circuit, and it uses symmetrical diode clipping.
Okay, so op-amp, symmetrical clipping. That sounds like it puts it in the family tree of, say, the classic MXR distortion plus path.
Instantly. And even the DoD 250 preamp pedals, it's in that lineage.
Right, but those older pedals, they're famous for being, bright, pretty aggressive, sometimes even a little bit trashy when you crank them.
Yeah, raw is a good word.
But the M78, everyone seems to describe it as warmer, richer. So what engineering choices make this one sound like a refined, high-end amp and not just a crude classic distortion?
That's the whole story of the M78, isn't it? It's all about the refinement of that classic topology. Yeah. So while it shares that op-amp core, it has several really critical additions.
Like what?
Enhanced filtering, more sophisticated gain staging, and really crucial EQ tuning. Yeah. Those older pedals you mentioned, they're very raw. They basically just clip the signal and send it out.
Right.
The M78 shapes and fine-tunes that resulting sound after the clipping, and that's what lets it achieve that much more refined, amp-like quality.
Okay, let's pause on the clipping for a second. You mentioned symmetrical diode clipping. For listeners maybe not deep into pedal building, how does symmetrical clipping feel different to the player compared to maybe the asymmetrical clipping in something like a Boss DS1?
Good question. It really changes how the waveform gets clipped. Symmetrical clipping, it clips both the positive and negative sides of the signal wave equally, which tends to give you a smoother, more even, and kind of harmonically rich distortion. It's very classic British high gain, that sound.
Right, smoother.
Whereas asymmetrical clipping, which clips one side harder than the other, introduces more complex, sometimes clashing harmonics. It's often perceived as more aggressive, maybe fuzzier, sometimes a bit uncontrolled.
So the M78 symmetric approach is really essential for getting that saturated but still smooth Marshall-y feel.
Precisely. And the high headroom they engineered into the circuit, that's critical too.
Why is that?
Well, if your pedal just compresses the signal right away, you lose all your dynamic range. MXR built the M78 specifically to retain dynamic response, so even when you have the distortion cranked way up, you can still hear the difference between picking softly and really digging in with the pick. That responsiveness, that's the hallmark of a great tube amp, and they managed to bake it right into this little box.
And it is a cool-looking box, that standard compact metallic red housing. The controls themselves seem deceptively simple, just 3 main knobs, right? Gives you squeakability without being overwhelming.
Yeah, straightforward layout.
You've got the output, which is your master volume. You can slam your amps input if you want. Then there's distortion, controlling the gain, the clipping amount.
Standard stuff.
But the real difference maker seems to be that tone knob. This is an active, high-frequency control, isn't it?
It is, and that's important. It takes you from a darker, almost smooth tone, great for rhythm, all the way up to this incredibly sharp, biting lead tone that just cuts through anything. Really versatile.
And looking at the physical details, you mentioned reliability. The M78 was the first custom badass pedal to use all analog through-hole components.
That's right, through-hole. So the components are physically inserted through the board, not just surface-mounted like a lot of modern stuff.
And that wasn't just for looks, right?
No, definitely not just nostalgia. It was a commitment, really, signaling that this pedal was built to be potentially modifiable, repairable, durable for decades. You know, just like the vintage gear it's trying to emulate.
Built like a tank.
Plus, it's got true mechanical bypass, so when the effect is off, your signal is completely untouched. It's a proper workhorse bolt.
Okay, so it looks simple, 3 knobs. But the real secret, it isn't on the surface, is it? We have to talk about that little rocker switch.
Oh, yes.
Right on the front, labeled CRO-NCH. That seems to be the key differentiator. Why did MXR include this? What's it actually doing under the hood?
The CRU-NCH switch is absolutely the M78's secret weapon. It transforms it from just a great distortion into this, like, hot rod beast.
How so?
Well, when you flip that switch, you're engaging 2 things at once. An additional clipping stage and a preset EQ boost.
Ah, okay. Both happen.
Yep. And that's what adds the aggression, the extra sustain, that bite, and also a noticeable compression that guitarists really crave for lead work.
So it's not just more gain, it's reshaping the tone, too.
Totally. And if we connect this back to that whole 78 tone quest idea, this switch is basically meant to simulate the response of a real tube amp being pushed beyond its factory limits, specifically what players used to call variast.
Okay, now, variac. For listeners maybe unfamiliar, that refers to using a variable transformer to actually lower the AC voltage feeding the amp, right?
Exactly.
Why would players do that? Doesn't less voltage mean less power? Sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah, it does sound weird, but that's a common misconception. When you drop the voltage, sometimes called browning out the amp, you actually change the operating conditions of the tubes.
Oh.
They sound and feel different, often a bit softer on the attack, but with increased saturation and sag, kind of a chewy feel. It's actually pretty dangerous for old vintage gear if you don't know what you're doing.
Right. Probably not recommended.
No. But it results in this really compressed, touch-sensitive feel and this boosted mid-range gain. The CRO-NCH switch essentially gives you that kind of feel instantly and safely.
Okay, and here's a fantastic bit of history that connects directly to that whole modification idea. I love this insight from the sources. It turns out the CRO-NCH circuit was inspired by a specific modded Distortion Plus prototype that MXR engineers had secretly kept in their archives since the late 70s. How cool is that?
Wow, that's a really powerful connection to the past. So that archive prototype wasn't just some random experiment.
Apparently not. It was MXR's own attempt back then to get into that high-gain zone. And crucially, get this, that prototype used asymmetrical clipping and specific frequency shaping.
Asymmetrical. Interesting.
In a direct attempt to mimic the legendary Eddie Van Halen Brown sound quest.
No kidding. So the CRO-NCH mode has roots in chasing the Brown sound.
Seems like it. So when you hit that CRO-NCH switch, you're basically engaging the DNA of a forgotten engineering experiment that was aiming for one of the most iconic tones in rock history. It sort of blends the smoothness of the main symmetrical clipping with this extra push derived from that asymmetrical clipping knowledge.
That really explains why the M78 feels so dynamic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's built on literally decades of engineers striving for that specific saturated British stack sound.
Okay.
So if we summarize the overall tonal profile, what are we hearing?
Strong mids, definitely.
Yeah. Strong present mids, a bright top end that really cuts through a band mix, and importantly, a tight, focused low end. It avoids getting muddy.
Which is crucial for high gain.
Absolutely. The overall feel is dynamic, slightly compressed, exactly like you'd expect from a high gain Marshall stack, pushed right to saturation.
And what's impressive is how usable the whole sweep of the distortion knob is. It's definitely not just a one-trick pony. For listeners thinking about dialing this in, what kind of gain range are we talking about?
Right. Well, at the low settings, let's say, distortion knob around 9 to 11 o'clock, You get that fantastic vintage crunch.
Like AC/DC rhythm.
Perfect for that.
Yeah.
Heavy rhythm work instantly brings AC/DC or Thin Lizzy rhythm tones to mind, and it cleans up nicely with your guitar's volume knob, too.
Nice. What about the middle range?
Push it to the mid settings, say noon to maybe 2 o'clock, and now you're deep into classic 80s hard rock and heavy metal territory. Great sustain for solos there.
And cranked all the way.
And even at the high settings, like 3 to 5 o'clock, where it gets really thick and heavily compressed, the engineering ensures it still manages to preserve individual note clarity. That's crucial for complex chords or fast lead runs. It doesn't just turn into mush.
And then once you engage the CRUNCH mode,
Yeah,
that's when the pedal really screams, right?
absolutely. The CRUNCH mode provides this dedicated upper mid boost and as high-frequency presence sizzle, basically. This is where you get that truly screaming lead tone.
That cutting edge.
Yeah, and that distinctive harmonic bloom, that kind of halo of overtones around the main note. That's what you associate with a really hot-rodded Marshall or maybe an early boutique high-gain amp like a Soldano.
Okay, so if I'm a listener, I just got this pedal, I want to try it out. What's my set it and forget it classic rock setting? Where should I start?
Good question. For a thick foundational classic rock crunch, I'd recommend a balanced kind of setting. Try output maybe around 1.0, tone at 11.00, just smoothing off the very top end a tiny bit. Distortion around 10.0, enough crunch but not too saturated. And keep the crunch switch off for this. That's your solid rhythm foundation.
Got it. Output 1, tone 11, distortion 10, crunch off.
Yeah.
Okay, what if I want that aggressive 80s hard rock lead tone? The one that screams.
For that aggressive, harmonically rich lead tone, you need to push the mids and the saturation. I'd go output higher, maybe 2.00 tone up to 1.0s to really cut through. Distortion also around 1.0.
So pushing everything a bit.
Yeah, and definitely flip the crunch switch to on. That configuration gives you the dynamic compression and that mid-range kick you need for serious lead work. It just sings.
That range of application, that versatility, is probably why the M78 often gets compared so favorably to some of the classics it came from and competed against. Let's talk comparisons for a minute. How does the M78 really stack up against its siblings and rivals?
Okay, well, if you compare the M78 to its great-grandfather, the original MXR Distortion plus Tregi, the difference is really maturity, I think.
Maturity. How so?
The D Plus is extremely raw, very open-sounding. And it famously lacks a tone control, right? So its overall EQ is basically whatever your amp gives it.
Right, very dependent on the amp.
The M78, by contrast, is just unequivocally warmer, richer, more organic feeling, mainly due to that crucial filtering we talked about and that active tone control. The M78 is refined, the D Plus is primal.
Okay, makes sense. And how about its major rival, the perennial bestseller, the Boss DS1? How does it compare there?
The DS1 comparison is even more telling, I think. The DS1 is kind of famous or infamous for having a slightly scooped EQ profile.
Meaning the mids are pulled back.
Exactly, mids pulled back. And because of that, it can sometimes sound a bit thin or kind of grainy, especially at higher gain settings.
Yeah, I've heard that description.
The M78 is far more mid-forward, less scooped, definitely more harmonically complex. It just feels way more amp-like because it's sustaining and tightening the mid-range, which is, where the power of a Marshall stack really lives.
So the conclusion is?
The conclusion really is simple. The M78 gives you a studio-ready, balanced tone right out of the box. It offers this professional refinement that a lot of its predecessors just lacked.
So what does this all mean for its legacy then? I mean, it came out in 2011, which isn't that long ago in gear terms, but it really cemented its place almost immediately as a modern classic.
It really did. It proved that analog simplicity, when engineered with careful attention to historical detail and modern component quality, could still compete powerfully with even complex digital modeling.
And its applications are pretty varied, right? It's not just one thing.
No, absolutely. It's definitely sought after as a player's main distortion source, but it's also very frequently used specifically as a reliable Marshall in a box.
Like a tone shaper.
Exactly. Run it in front of a clean or maybe slightly broken up amp to get that Marshall character. And its success didn't just start with the M78 either. It really revived MXR's focus on serious distortion pedals. It set the standard for that whole custom badass line that followed, including the M75 Super Badass Distortion in 2013, which is another great pedal.
So the M78 really successfully bridged that gap, didn't it? Between those desirable vintage plexi tones and that more modern hot rod aggression, all all in a compact, reliable analog format.
It absolutely bottled the most desirable sonic elements from the late 70s and early 80s, and it made them attainable for players today without needing to, spend a fortune on temperamental, high-maintenance vintage amps.
Which is huge.
Like,
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. That powerful Crear NCH mode, the real heart of the M78's versatility. It was directly inspired by those archived mods and forgotten engineering prototypes aiming for the Brown sound.
Yeah, that hidden history.
Which means the circuitry that defines one of the best compact distortion pedals of the last, 15 years or so, was basically sitting on a shelf in a lab for 30 years.
Kind of amazing when you think about it.
It really is. So consider this. How many classic rock tones that you hear are actually built on those kinds of undocumented, maybe forgotten experiments? Things that eventually, decades later, made their way into modern mass production pedals, like the M78. What other hidden history is packed into the gear you love? We'll let you chew on that one.